What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Mohsin Memon, and we speak about games and how they can facilitate learning in a multiplayer digital environment. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. Now, lean back and be inspired. Mohsin, welcome to the show.
Hi.
I'm excited. We're going to speak about one of my favorite topics today, about games and facilitation, and facilitating games and facilitating learning through games.
One of my favorites as well. So we're on the same page there.
What a nice coincidence. And there's always the same warm-up question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I do, actually. That's one of the titles that I attribute myself to. And for me, it was quite an interesting journey. It started out being a trainer. I think I started almost a decade ago, prior to facilitator being a commonly used word for folks who do facilitate. But I think there's also been a transition that I've gone through, where initially I was, in fact, a trainer because I used to train on soft skills. And that transitioned and transformed into taking on the role of more of a facilitator, because that's something that I resonated with. It appealed to me deeply. Also because as a facilitator, I'm no longer training and I'm no longer imparting my wisdom. I'm, what I mean, right?
Yes.
I'm not center stage anymore. I'm enabling, I'm empowering, I'm creating, co-creating with my participants. So I guess that transition happened about 7 years ago for me.
Interesting. And I would be curious, what in particular, maybe one example that has changed in your practice between being a trainer and becoming a facilitator, from transferring your knowledge from your brain to their brain towards enabling them to bridge the knowledge gap themselves, maybe?
Yeah, I think it was it's even today true that a very, very simple and core belief that I don't have all the answers. And that's okay.
Yeah. The facilitator's mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think it has also to do with how we set the stage? So I think if you're inviting a group to a training, then they have expectations of receiving knowledge. Whereas I can imagine, I'm thinking out loud, if we're inviting them to a workshop, it sounds that they have to work for the knowledge. So it's more of an active than a passive role?
Yeah, I agree. I would have to second that. So when participants are invited in order to participate in a facilitated ecosystem versus in a training, there's a different kind of commitment and attitude that the participants bring to the table. And I think we sometimes have to go beyond just terming it facilitator. We may have to specify what is expected of the participants as well, because not everybody understands and resonates with the term facilitator or facilitated ecosystems. And not everybody gets it. I mean, an average, director of a company or the average VP of an organization may not necessarily know the nuances of what a facilitator is there to do. But if they're told that this is going to be your role, where you'll be actively participating in co-creating something, then that's the expectation that they walk in through the door with.
I love that. And so you're starting you're priming the group on the belief that they are about to learn from each other as much as you bring in terms of maybe methods or insights.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And nowadays you're using games to facilitate learning or to facilitate training.
Yeah.
What do you understand by game? Just to make sure that we are speaking about the same thing.
So a game is a closed and controlled environment in which there are players, there are rules, and there is something that the players are playing with, a toy, if you will, just to simplify it. And these three elements create the ecosystem of a game.
Is there necessarily always a goal and a winner?
Yes and no.
What if it was easy for once?
Right. Yes, because all games require a goal for people to try to achieve. Whether you're playing a collaborative game or whether you're playing a competitive game, there has to be some sort of an end goal that you're going after. This is true for finite games, but then there are infinite games as well. And that's what I meant when I said no, that not all games have to have a goal, because in an infinite game, you're hoping to play just to play, to keep the game going.
Love the book, Finite and Infinite Games by James and I don't mean Simon Sinek, but the original. Yes. The only goal of an infinite game is to keep on playing, and it's actually more a mindset.
Yeah.
Of playing an infinite game.
Yeah.
So what got you into using games as a tool or a method to train? Were you first into games and then into training, or first into training and then you use games?
Well, I've always been into games. Ever since I was a kid, I played a lot of games and loved the fantastic reality that games would create. And I've had my own journey with different kinds of games, because when you think of games, a lot of times we think of a singular type of game, and that's often attributed to our own experience of games. So if you have had an experience of seeing or associating a game with something like Mario, then that's what's in your mind when somebody talks about a game. Versus if your experience has been Tetris, then that's what you're thinking when somebody else is talking about a game. Versus if your experience of a game is a card playing game, whether it's playing cards or a deck-based game, then that's what you're thinking. So I've had my own journey with different types of games, even in the video game genre alone. I think my first few games were, of course, Mario and Tetris, and that's where it started for me. And then it moved into skateboarding games. And I played a lot of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, all of them probably for as long as I could when I was a kid. And then moved into more of role-playing games. And that was a really interesting transition as well, because now I was no longer just mashing buttons, playing, fighting and doing a 2D battle against my friends. Now I was really an active member of the game ecosystem. The game was built around me. So I was the hero. I was the protagonist. And I was navigating through various worlds and acquiring items and unlocking levels and defeating monsters and collaborating with other AI elements within the game world. So that was a journey in itself. And then I moved into board games, and that opened up another whole, realm of games for me. So I guess I've always been into games, but what's changed the way in which I've integrated that into my life and my work has been through the power of bringing game elements into what I did, whether it was when I was a trainer or whether it was when I was a facilitator as well. And even today, when I deliver learning experiences, they're centered around a game ecosystem.
Thank you for bringing all that up and putting it into context. And before going deeper in how you're using games for the learning context and to create the ecosystem, you made me realize that maybe every human being on Earth has a very personal relationship with games. So depending on your past experience, exactly what you explained, when you say games, do I think Super Mario? Do I think Tetris? Do I think board games? Do I think, or do I remember the times where I, as a kid, was sitting under the table screaming because I was losing again? Or do I remember the times where we had this kind of cozy family time with a sense of belonging and loving? And I wonder, is it something that you have to take into consideration, that when you're inviting a diverse group of individuals around a virtual or physical table to play a game, that first you have to normalize what it means to play a game?
Yeah, spot on. What it means to play a game and what it means to play this game, the one we are about to play. And, a lot of times I get this question of, older folks will not play a game, or, men play more games than women do. And that's not true, actually. Or any of those, stereotypes. But my belief is that it's not so much about whether some people play games and others don't. I think the question really is, what kind of games do people play? And I'm not talking about transactional analysis of what, the games people play. I'm talking about just the idea of games or play.
So collaboration versus competition, that's something that you mentioned earlier. The nature of the game and the role of the individual strategy. Maybe what is the winning strategy? Is this what you're referring to?
That could be one example. There could be others as well. So are you into a casual game? Are you into a strategic game? Are you into something that's role-playing? Are you into something that is action? Are you into first-person shooter? So there are many different types of games. And I think we really ought to see games as another media, just like books or TV or radio. There are different types of media, and every media has many genres in it and has the power to teach, to educate, to entertain, and to distribute information. So similarly, games have the ability to do all of that because they're just another media. The difference between a game as a media and any other print or visual media is that games allow the player to be an active member in that media.
And it basically normalizes the situation by definition because you're creating this new ecosystem.
Yeah.
And you would then take the time to get the participant there, because I wonder to what extent culture or ethics also play a role in how we show up to a game. So, for instance, in some cultures, it might be more, the competitive nature of a game might be more natural. So the mindset with which I'm entering a game will be totally different as when I'm part of a society where it's more collaborative or maybe more creative, or maybe it doesn't play a role when you onboard participants on this learning journey through games.
It does. I'd have to 100% agree with what you're saying, because I've had the privilege of facilitating Evive, the game that I have built, one of the games that I've built, across many geographies with people of different backgrounds, different walks of life, and different age groups. And I've seen that in cultures and regions where competition is a very core part of who the people are. And that could be due to a number of reasons. One of them could be population. If there's a lot of population in a region or in a country, then job opportunities are scarce. And because of that, people need to be more competitive in order to get that, whether it's for a job or whether it's for a placement in a college, a prestigious college, or whether it's in any degree, any part of your life. And that versus another ecosystem where competition is not a core part of how people live their lives. And when I've seen people play Vive, there's a greater and more natural affinity to collaborate in the regions where there isn't competition by default versus in other regions where competition is inherent, slightly more inherent, or a greater affinity.
And what you're just sharing kind of evokes in me that, so depending on who the audience is, who the players are, and the strategies or the ways of playing the game they choose, there's so many different levels to reflect on a game and to learn from it. So to debrief, which then makes me think and ask, are all games created equal? So what makes a good game to facilitate learning? Because that's the topic of our conversation today in the core of your work.
I would say it would depend on what we are trying to facilitate, because not all games can facilitate everything. So it would start with, does the game bring up the elements that we are trying to facilitate? So I'll give you an example. If we are attempting to facilitate for a group of people or a group of leaders who are not aligned to one another, they're kind of doing their own thing. We need cohesion in the team. We need people to account for what other members of the team are doing before they take an action. We need the game to simulate and provide such opportunities to the players in the game ecosystem. Because ultimately, your goal when you're trying to facilitate using games is to create the reality that the players are facing in real life in the game ecosystem, so that they can look at that in that container ecosystem, take a step back, zoom out, look at what they've done and evaluate if what they did was productive or counterproductive.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, understand correctly, it must be from the context or from the rules or to reflect the behavior, but still sufficiently abstract or different to trigger maybe the unconscious behavior.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what is the real tricky part of all of this, is for it to be far removed from their present reality, that it has to be abstract enough for them to not just be able to compare apples to apples. This is what I did in real life, and this is what I'm doing in the game ecosystem, because the actions are identical and the outcome is identical. But when we create an abstract enough, a fantasy ecosystem environment, we are now comparing apples to apples at a behavior level, but apples and oranges at an outcome level in the game.
Have you noticed, or would it then happen that someone would say, yes, but this is just a game? I think what we try to remove through a game is the finger pointing. So basically, we increase the level of abstraction and can then look at the behavior of a team or a group in the game and then discuss, okay, does this also happen in real life? Air quotes. And what does it mean? To what extent do you have then defense mechanisms of someone saying, yeah, but this was just a game. And in real life, I'm totally different. I'm never that competitive in real life. In real life, I don't cheat.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so it's happened to me, because when you facilitate as many games as I have, then this is bound to happen. And what I've come to realize is that it is all about creating psychological safety for the participants. That if they feel that this is a space for them to learn, a space for them to experiment, a space for them to gain insight about themselves, about what's working, about what's not working, so on and so forth, then they are likely to adopt the concept, the idea, the approach. If they feel otherwise, they will denounce it. And in some cases, they may even challenge the facilitator. And there are ways to work around that. For example, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit when facilitating games is the importance of the facilitator equipping the players with everything they need in order to play the game. I used to be, at one point in my life, of the opinion that people must suffer and that they must go through the rigor of defeat in order to gain anything meaningful out of the game. And no, but that's not true anymore for me. I don't view it that way any longer. And it took one specific event for me to change my mind about that. And the event was something to the effect of, I facilitated the game, didn't provide as much support to the players as they were playing, and the team that was playing the game turned on me. They believed that I had rigged the game for them to lose because they played 3 times, they lost all 3 times, and that pretty much took away the learning that could have been in that ecosystem, because they were of the opinion that no matter how hard we try to play and win this game, we will not win because you set us up to lose. This game is unwinnable. And that can be detrimental. It can be disastrous for a facilitated ecosystem.
How did you react in this situation? I mean, that's kind of a facilitator's nightmare.
Yes, it really is. It was my nightmare for sure. For me, that day, I pretty much had to bring every ounce of facilitation I had in me to bring the team together. And I really dealt with the core issue at hand, which was, do you believe this is a winnable game? And then convince them and show them all the ways in which this was a winnable game.
And it's such an interesting case. Thank you for bringing them up, because on the one hand, I can imagine that it might even be beneficial for the team because it brings the team closer together. They have a common enemy, air quotes, who's you in this case. And then for the facilitator, this challenge of modeling behavior that we would consider important for teams, like admitting shortcomings, mistakes, how to communicate, how to be open for feedback, how to listen. And if something that it's your game, so it's something deeply personal. So for me, I can only imagine the challenge of not becoming defensive and using it to model kind of behavior and leadership and how to deal with setbacks and challenges on a meta level.
Yeah, that was a challenging one.
What makes a workshop fail, in your opinion?
A game-based learning workshop?
Yes.
I would say one is this bit that we've just now talked about, which is people believing that the system is rigged in some way for them to fail every time so that they can draw some learning from it. So I think it's disbelief in the method is one. And that, I think this point can be applied across the board, whether it's the method of how you're facilitating, whether it's the method of a game, or whether it's a framework, it could be anything. But if your participants have a disbelief in that method, then it's likely to fail.
Yeah, which is, again, it's related to trust and hence also to psychological safety, what you meant beforehand. And I find it interesting. Maybe we can circle back to what you said earlier about the degree of difficulty of a game. So if it's too difficult and you don't give sufficient guidance to the team, they will feel frustrated up to a point where it becomes a failure, as you say, because they will become ignorant to the learning because it's all about distrust into the system. On the other hand, if it's too easy, then it's boring or it's not fun.
Yeah.
So how do you choose the level of difficulty? Is it a trial and error? Does it depend on the group?
Of course, it depends on the group. It depends on the people's ability to play and people's ability to engage as well and understand, comprehend the game environment. But it's also the game's responsibility. I think what you're talking about is the proverbial challenge of engagement. If it's too easy, I will disengage. If it's too hard, I will disengage. So it's like there's a path, there's a narrow and straight path in the middle with valleys on both ends, right, on both sides. And so you've got to identify what will it take for you to keep your players on that path. Now, the tricky thing about this is that it can't just be one setting from the beginning to the end. And I think games do this quite naturally via an element called progression and leveling up. So as you level up in the game becomes progressively harder. But as you're leveling up, you're also skilling up. So you're becoming more and more skilled in how to play the game. So you're becoming more adept in your ability to play the game. And now you're able to deal with greater challenges than you did before because you're more skilled. So the game is matching your skill level every time. And some games do this really beautifully, where they will create some elements in which you will progressively fail, only to realize that you need to be at a higher level in order to defeat that boss or to overcome that one mission or that one challenge. And that's a very relevant and critical part of what games do in order to engage. Scaffolding is another great example of how games bring new players up to speed.
Can you give an example? What do you mean by scaffolding?
So support ecosystems created by the game to teach you how to play, and where the game itself helps you learn the core mechanics of the game. How do you earn the currency? How do you unlock weapons? Or how do you navigate? How do you move from point A to point B? Most games, if you ever download a video game, or even if you download, for example, I'll give you a great example. I just recently purchased a board game called Wingspan. It's a beautiful game. If you've never played it, give it a go. In Wingspan, you are responsible for a bird sanctuary, and you are to bring wild birds and different kinds of birds, and you have to breed them in your bird sanctuary. To do that, you need to attract the right bird with the right kind of food, and you've got to create the habitat for the bird to lay eggs, do all of that kind of stuff, right? Now, while this game is quite complex because it has many actions and there could be a lot of different things you could do, what the creators of the game did was they packed a very separate rule book with very separate bird cards and very separate ecosystem with player mats just for first-time play. And they marked it very clearly, indicating that if you're playing this game for the first time, use only this. And now they've taken away all of the additional mechanics from that ecosystem, and they've given me just what I really need to know, and with guided support, turn by turn, on exactly what I need to do in order to learn and get up to speed and start playing quickly.
This is so smart, because I was just thinking of board games that I've started, and I'm not a huge board game. I'm not coming from a board game family. I think this, right? There are two kinds of people. And I realized that I lost the habit to really read the instructions and go through it and learn it step by step, because how we learn nowadays is through digital interactive media. So I click somewhere, it doesn't work. I click somewhere else, and thereby I learn very fast. To sit down to read instructions and then not getting the immediate feedback loop that what I've done is actually wrong and doesn't work out can lead to frustration very quickly. So to have a mini game to just get used to the mechanics of the game and maybe to get some very first dopamine highs of, it worked out.
Yeah.
Small success.
Small successes. It's also about attention span.
Yes.
To watch even a video. Some of these board games have 30-minute and 60-minute long videos that just teach you how to play. Yeah.
People don't even watch my 1-minute videos until the end.
Yeah. And some of these have that level of work that you have to do in order to just learn how to play the game.
Yeah.
And once you learn it, then you come back and play it. So this was such a smart scaffolding mechanism that they had built. And I haven't seen this in a lot of games. I've played a lot of board games, and I have not seen this in a lot of games, but they have it in this one. And it was beautiful to see, and it was beautiful to experience, because I was able to just read what I'm supposed to do in the turn, do my turn, move to the next one. Somebody else takes their turn. They're following their instructions. I'm learning by watching them. They're learning by watching my move. And within 5 or 7 moves, we're now able to understand how the flow of events work in the game ecosystem. So that's an example of scaffolding.
Very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. And I just, random thought, I just wonder how many different versions of a board game exist by people who just understand the instructions in a different way and then create their own games and play their own rules, which is maybe just good enough.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there are a million variations of every board game in the world.
For sure, because the instructions can be read differently. I mean, I've played with a number of friends who've played a certain game differently, wrong or right. I can't comment on that, but they've played it differently than I have. So that happens.
Yeah, that's what I love about backgammon. Depending on which region of the world you're going to, backgammon is always played slightly differently.
Yeah.
And every culture believes that their way of playing backgammon is the best one. Hello, listener. Are you tired of listening to my podcast voice praising our sponsor Session Lab in each episode? I think it's time to pass the mic over to you. So if you are as much of a Session Lab fan and user as I am, please share your experience and praise, and don't be shy of add a sentence of self-promo. Send me your soundbite and you might hear yourself on the next show and find your name and URL in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.